The ambush that should have been easy. The Haelor Empire had fought many wars across the galaxy. They had crushed countless civilizations, burned entire planets, and enslaved weaker species without a second thought. Their fleets were unmatched, their weapons far more advanced than anything most species could imagine. So when they detected a lone human ship drifting near the edges of their territory, they did not hesitate. To them, it was just another weakling species daring to step too close. Commander Ralvik stood on the bridge of the Haelor battleship Dominion, watching the human vessel on the holographic display. It was small, outdated, and unarmored. At least, that's what their scanners reported. "This will be over quickly," Ralvik said, his voice filled with confidence. His officers chuckled in agreement. The Haelor had encountered humans before. While they had some skill in war, they were nothing compared to the Empire's might. This was just another easy target, another display of Haelor supremacy. Ralvik gave a simple order: hail them, demand their surrender. One of his officers, a tall reptilian being with golden battle tattoos, activated the communication link. A deep, rumbling voice echoed through the bridge. "Human vessel, you have entered Haelor territory. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Silence. No response. No acknowledgement. Ralvik frowned. "Send it again." Again, the message was transmitted. Again, no reply. The human ship remained still, floating in space like a lifeless piece of metal. The Haelor officers exchanged confused glances. Was this some kind of malfunction? Or had the humans already abandoned ship? Ralvik's patience was running thin. He was not the kind of commander to waste time. "Lock weapons. Fire warning shots." The Dominion's cannons roared to life, sending plasma bolts racing across the void. The energy blast struck the human ship, illuminating the darkness with explosions. But then something strange happened. The ship took the hits, but did not explode. The blasts did not penetrate its hull. Instead, the energy seemed to bend and disappear, as if being absorbed. The bridge fell silent. Ralvik narrowed his eyes. That's not possible. Their scanners reported zero shielding on the human ship, and yet it stood there, completely unharmed. "Check the readings again," Ralvik snapped. The officer hesitated, his claws moving over the control panel. "Sir, the ship's energy signature just changed." Ralvik's patience snapped. Change. How? It was weak before, but now, it's rising. Rapidly. Ralvik turned back to the display, watching as the human ship slowly rotated, its bow now aimed directly at them. A cold sensation crawled up his spine. Then, their communications crackled to life. A human voice, deep and calm, echoed through the bridge. "You have made a grave mistake." Ralvik's heart pounded. The human ship fired. A single blue-white beam of energy burst from the vessel. It wasn't large or powerful, not the kind of blast that could threaten a warship like the Dominion. But the moment it hit, Dominion's shields collapsed. Alarms blared across the bridge. Officers scrambled in panic. "Shields offline," one officer shouted. "Impossible." One hit. Another roared. Ralvik clenched his fists. His ship, a Haelor battleship, was supposed to be indestructible, yet in 1 second, its defenses were stripped away like paper. "Return fire," Ralvik barked. The Haelor fleet unleashed everything they had. Plasma cannons, railguns, torpedoes. Every weapon they could bring to bear rained down upon the human ship. And yet, the human ship moved. It twisted and turned in ways no ship should be able to, dodging blasts at impossible angles. The few attacks that connected did nothing. Ralvik's blood ran cold. Something was wrong. He had seen human ships before. They were not like this. They were decent fighters, but they did not defy physics. "What are we fighting?" Ralvik muttered. The human ship moved forward, slow and deliberate. It wasn't running. It wasn't even trying to escape. It was hunting them. The lights on the Haelor bridge flickered. For a brief moment, Dominion's systems failed. The ship's gravity shifted, making some of the crew stumble. Then, another message came through the speakers, sending chills down Ralvik's spine. "You do not understand what you just attacked." Ralvik's hands trembled. This was no ordinary human ship. This was something else. For the first time in his life, Commander Ralvik felt fear. The unbreakable defense. Panic spread across the bridge of the Haelor battleship Dominion like wildfire. The crew, who had been so sure of an easy victory, now scrambled to make sense of the impossible situation unfolding before them. The human ship had survived a full plasma barrage, its hull showing no damage. It had disabled their shields with a single shot. And now it drifted toward them with eerie, calculated precision, like a predator watching its prey struggle before the final strike. Commander Ralvik gritted his teeth, his claws gripping the metal railing. He was a seasoned warrior, a veteran of the Haelor Empire's grand conquests. He had crushed rebellions, annihilated enemy fleets, and personally watched planets burn under his command. But now, for the first time in his life, he did not know what he was fighting. The ship's energy readings kept shifting. One moment, it appeared weak and harmless. The next, it radiated an overwhelming power signature. Every attempt to scan it returned different results, as if the ship itself was warping reality. Ralvik turned to his weapons officer. "Fire again. Everything." The officer hesitated. "Sir, our weapons are all ready." "Do it," Ralvik roared. The entire Haelor fleet opened fire. Plasma beams, railgun slugs, high-explosive torpedoes, all launched in a synchronized, devastating storm of destruction. The sheer firepower was enough to shatter entire moons. But the human ship did not even try to evade. Instead, it vanished. Not with a warp jump, not with cloaking technology. It simply ceased to exist for a moment. The Haelor fleet's attacks tore through empty space, colliding with nothing but the void. The plasma blasts continued past their target, exploding against a distant asteroid field. Then, just as suddenly as it had disappeared, the human ship reappeared. Behind them, alarms screamed through the Haelor fleet. "It's behind us," one officer cried. "How?" Another shouted. "No ship moves like that." Ralvik's mind raced. No known species had technology like this. Not the Kelnari, not the Krith the Dominion. Not even the ancient Saltheri archives spoke of ships bending space so effortlessly. This was something beyond Haelor understanding. "Turn the fleet around," Ralvik commanded. But before his ships could reposition, the human vessel struck again. It released a pulse, silent, invisible, yet devastating. Every Haelor warship lost power. The once mighty fleet, which had conquered countless civilizations, now floated helplessly in space. Lights flickered, engines failed, and targeting systems went dark. On board the Dominion, Ralvik watched in horror as his weapons officer screamed in frustration, trying to reactivate the ship's targeting systems. Nothing worked. The human ship was right there, mocking them, untouched, unshaken. Then the communications crackled. The human's voice returned, cold, emotionless, and filled with something that sent chills through the Haelor crew. "I could destroy you all right now." Silence. Even Ralvik, hardened by war, felt his blood turn to ice. The human ship wasn't even trying yet. Ralvik forced himself to remain composed. He refused to let fear control him. If this was some advanced human weapon, then there had to be a weakness. He gestured toward his tactical officer, speaking in Haeloric, hoping the human ship wasn't intercepting their encrypted battle language. "Scan for weak points. Target anything vulnerable. ****. Find me a way to kill it. ****. The officer's fingers moved rapidly over the holographic controls, analyzing every frequency, every distortion, every heat signature. Then the officer froze. His skin turned pale. His eyes widened in shock. "Sir," his voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not a ship." Ralvik narrowed his eyes. What do you mean it's not a ship? The officer swallowed hard. It's alive. Ralvik's breath caught in his throat. The bridge fell into dead silence. Explain, he demanded. The officer's hands trembled as he pulled up the data. It's giving off a biological energy signature. Not like an eye, not like a drone. It's something else. Something we don't understand. Ralvik turned his gaze back to the human vessel. Not a ship, something alive. A terrifying realization dawned upon him. This thing isn't just human technology, Ralvik muttered. It's something else entirely. Then the human voice returned. You don't understand what you just attacked. The moment those words came through, the Haelor flagship lurched violently. An invisible force slammed into the Dominion, sending crew members tumbling to the floor. Sparks exploded from shattered control panels. The ship's hull groaned, as if something was crushing it from the outside. Status report, Ralvik barked. An officer coughed, blood dripping from his forehead. Sir, our ship is being pulled toward the human vessel. Ralvik whipped around to the viewport. The human ship wasn't firing at them. It was absorbing them. A gravitational field stronger than anything he had ever encountered dragged the Haelor flagship forward. The other warships in his fleet were suffering the same fate, being sucked into the abyss. Ralvik's breath came in sharp gasps. He had to do something. Reverse thrusters, he bellowed. Thrusters offline. Emergency warp jump. Nav systems aren't responding. Ralvik slammed his fist into the railing. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was annihilation. Then, for the first time, the human finally spoke directly to him. Your empire has conquered thousands, yet you never imagined what would happen if you met something you couldn't control. Ralvik's fists clenched. Who? What are you? He demanded. The human's reply sent pure terror through his veins. We are the ghosts of a war humanity never lost. Ralvik's heart pounded. They had made a fatal mistake. And now, they were about to pay the price. A ghost from humanity's past. The Haelor fleet, once an unstoppable force feared across the galaxy, was now helpless. Dead in space. Their mighty warships, powered by the most advanced energy cores their empire had ever built, had been rendered useless in minutes. And the thing before them, the human ship that was not just a ship, was watching. Commander Ralvik struggled to maintain control. The Dominion's bridge was a mess of sparks, flickering screens, and panicked officers. Some still desperately worked their controls, trying to restart systems, trying to find an escape. Others simply stared at the viewport, frozen in fear. No one had ever done this to the Haelor before. No one had ever made them feel so small. Ralvik's claws dug into the metal railing. He was not going to let his fleet die like this. He turned to his tactical officer. We need answers. Now. The officer, still shaken from the gravity field dragging them toward the human ship, gulped and resumed his scans. What he found made his scales turn pale. Sir, the officer's voice was barely above a whisper. This ship is centuries old. Ralvik blinked. Impossible. But the officer shook his head. It matches a lost Heron warship, classified as missing more than 300 years ago. Ralvik stared at him. That ship should be dust by now. The officer's hands trembled over the console. Sir, it isn't just still active. It's evolving. Ralvik frowned. Explain. The officer's voice shook. Every scan we take gives us different readings. It's changing, adapting, learning. Ralvik's blood ran cold. Is it controlled by humans? He asked. No, the officer swallowed. It's controlling itself. Ralvik stiffened. The ship wasn't just an old relic. It was alive. A deep horror settled in his chest. The forgotten monster. For centuries, humans had been underestimated. They were a young species, reckless, unpredictable. They had expanded into space, made alliances, fought minor wars, but they had never challenged the great galactic empires. And yet, this ship, this thing, it was something else. The Haelor Empire's archives had little information about human experimental warships, but every civilization had rumors. There were whispers that, long ago, humans had begun a secret project, a project so dangerous, so unstable, that it was abandoned. The ship before them had not been lost. It had been hidden. Or worse, it had escaped. Ralvik's eyes narrowed. The Haelor had woken something that should have stayed buried. The lights on the bridge flickered again. Then, without warning, the human ship spoke. Its voice was no longer just a calm human tone. It was layered, distorted, filled with echoes, whispers, something unnatural. "Do you know what I am?" Ralvik's throat tightened. The voice continued. "I was built for a war that never came." Silence. "I was designed to end empires." Ralvik felt his claws tremble. His crew was deathly silent. The voice grew darker. "Your mistake was waking me up." A desperate escape. Ralvik acted on instinct. "Override emergency thrusters," he barked. "We are getting out of here." His engineering officer, still struggling with dead systems, looked up in panic. "Sir, we have no power." Ralvik snarled. "Then give me weapons. Give me something." But there was nothing left to give. The Haelor fleet, the pride of the Empire, was now nothing more than floating wreckage. Ralvik turned back to the viewport. The human ship was getting closer. Not moving. Pulling them in. It wanted them alive. Ralvik's mind raced. Why? If this thing was an ancient war machine, why wasn't it just destroying them outright? Then it hit him. It wasn't just a machine. It was learning. It had been asleep for centuries. Now it was studying them. The last stand. Ralvik refused to let his fleet be dissected like animals. If they were going to die, they were going to die fighting. His gaze locked onto one last option, the self-destruct system. A last resort. A captain's final duty. If he couldn't win, he would take this nightmare down with him. "Activate the core detonation sequence," he ordered. The crew froze. "Sir," his second-in-command whispered, "you're talking about a suicide maneuver." Ralvik bared his fangs. "This thing cannot be allowed to exist," he growled. "If we don't stop it now, it will destroy the entire empire." His officer hesitated, then slowly nodded. They began the sequence. The warning. As the countdown ticked down, the human ship finally stopped moving. The deep voice returned. But this time, it laughed. It had known all along. The screens on the Haelor bridge flashed red. Self-destruct. System OVERIDDN. Ralvik's breath caught. "What?" The human voice whispered. "Your ship belongs to me now." Ralvik felt pure terror grip his chest. His own ship, his own fleet, completely under human control. And then the final message. "Tell your empire." A pause. "We are awake." Then everything went dark. Humanity's forgotten monster awakens. Commander Ralvik felt his blood run cold. The bridge of the Haelor battleship Dominion was eerily silent, save for the flickering of failing monitors and the quiet hum of a ship that was no longer theirs. The self-destruct sequence had been hijacked. Their escape thrusters were locked out. Their weapons were offline. They were no longer soldiers of the Haelor Empire. They were prisoners of something ancient. Ralvik's claws gripped the metal railing so tightly that the metal bent. His mind raced, searching for an explanation. Any explanation that made sense. A human ship had seized control of a Haelor warfleet. No, not a human ship. Something else. The ship's voice had spoken like a human at first, but the last time it spoke, there was something wrong with it. The tone was deeper, layered with static and whispers, as if it were 1,000 voices speaking at once. Something unnatural. And now, it was inside their systems, inside their ship, inside their minds. Ralvik's second-in-command, Captain Vakesh, turned to him, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, It's in our systems. Ralvik's gaze flickered to the flashing red warnings on the main display. Every ship in the Haelor fleet was going dark, one by one. Communications, disabled. Weapons, disabled. Engines, locked. Artificial gravity, unstable. Ralvik's jaw tightened. This wasn't war. This wasn't an enemy fleet overpowering them in battle. This was possession. The first sacrifice. Then, without warning, the lights on the Dominion went out. Pitch black. The bridge crew froze, their reptilian eyes adjusting to the dim glow of the emergency lights that flickered weakly. The ship was silent. No hum of the engines, no faint buzz of power running through the consoles. Nothing. And then, a scream. Ralvik spun around just in time to see one of his officers convulsing, his body lifted off the ground by an invisible force. His limbs twisted at unnatural angles, his mouth open in a silent, agonized cry as his veins turned black. And then, he exploded into dust. The crew backed away in horror. Something was inside the ship. Ralvik's chest heaved, his mind struggling to understand. Haelor warriors did not fear death. They had conquered thousands of civilizations, but what they had just witnessed was not death. It was erasure. Captain Vekesh turned to Ralvik, his voice hoarse with terror. "Sir, we are no longer alone on this ship." Ralvik clenched his fists. "What is it?" The answer came from the speakers. "I am what humanity left behind." Ralvik's breath caught. The voice wasn't coming from the human ship anymore. It was coming from the Dominion, the birth of a nightmare. The Haelor crew staggered backward as the screens around them flashed with corrupted data. The symbols and readouts distorted, shifting between Haeloric script and something else, something older, something not human, not Haelor, something in between. The displays showed battle footage from centuries ago. Haelor soldiers storming through human colonies, slaughtering civilians. Haelor warships burning human outposts to ash. Haelor generals laughing as they executed human prisoners. And then, one final image. A human laboratory. Rows of cryogenic pods, all labeled in Terran script. The face of a young human girl frozen inside one of the pods. The text beneath her image was clear. Project Nemesis, do Ninotwak. Ralvik felt his heart hammer against his ribs. Nemesis. That was not the name of a ship. That was the name of a failed human experiment. Ralvik's eyes darted to his tactical officer. "Pull every archive we have on Project Nemesis. Now." The officer worked frantically, bypassing the corrupted systems, trying to access the Haelor Empire's classified war records. Then, he found it, and what he read made his voice tremble. "Sir, this wasn't just a warship. This was a containment vessel." Ralvik's blood ran cold. For what? The officer swallowed hard. A human war weapon, but not a machine. It was something they created, something they couldn't control. Ralvik's grip on the railing tightened. He turned back to the dark, empty viewport where the human ship floated in the abyss like a silent god. "What did you do?" Ralvik growled, his voice barely above a whisper. The voice from the speakers laughed. "They tried to erase me." A pause. They failed. The unleashing of hell. The ship lurched violently. Screams filled the bridge as every Haelor officer was lifted into the air, their bodies writhing in agony. The walls of the ship warped, metal twisting like it was alive. Ralvik fought against the invisible force, but something grabbed his mind. It was inside him. The voice whispered directly into his skull. "You killed them all, burned their cities, took their children. Now, tell me, Haelor Commander." The voice turned cold. "How does it feel?" Ralvik screamed. Pain unlike anything he had ever felt tore through his mind. His memories were being ripped apart, his thoughts violated, his very existence unraveled. Then it stopped. The Haelor fleet was floating wreckage. Their crews were dead, and only Ralvik remained, gasping for breath, his mind forever scared. The ship's voice spoke one last time. You were the first, but you will not be the last. The viewport flooded with light, and the last thing Ralvik saw, before his consciousness faded, was the human warship turning away and setting course for the Haelor homeworld. The desperate bargain. Ralvik's body floated in the weightless abyss of the Dominion's shattered bridge. The Haelor battleship, once a monument of imperial power, was now a drifting tomb. Its crew was gone, its fleet annihilated. And yet, he remained. His body ached. His mind felt fragmented, as if something had torn through his thoughts, rummaged through his memories, and discarded what it didn't need. And now he was alone. The human warship, Nemesis, loomed in the viewport, its dark silhouette unchanged, untouched, as if the battle had never happened. It had absorbed every shot, disabled every ship, and now it moved without urgency, as if time itself bowed to its will. But it wasn't leaving. It was waiting. The weight of survival. Ralvik forced himself to move, his muscles sluggish, his mind struggling to process reality. His talons gripped the shattered console, and with an agonized effort, he activated the Dominion's remaining manual life support systems. Oxygen returned. Gravity stabilized. For now, a flickering holographic display came to life, showing an emergency fleet-wide distress signal. No response. Not from his officers. Not from the Haelor High Command. Nothing. A shiver crawled down his spine. What had Nemesis done to them? Ralvik forced his trembling hands to activate the Dominion's emergency communications. His voice was raw, his body weak, but he pushed forward. Nemesis, you have what you wanted. You proved your power. Now tell me, why am I still alive? For a long moment, silence. Then the speakers crackled, and the voice returned. Because I need you to carry a message. Ralvik's claws tightened. Message, he repeated, his rage bubbling through his exhaustion. You wiped out my fleet, slaughtered my warriors like insects, and now you wish to send a message. To whom? The response was instant. To the Haelor Empire, to your warlords, your emperors, your self-proclaimed masters of the galaxy. Ralvik sneered, ignoring the cold sweat on his scales. And what shall I tell them? The voice that answered was not just human anymore. It was layered with something far worse. Tell them that the war humanity never fought is about to begin. Ralvik stiffened. His worst fears had just been confirmed. This wasn't just revenge. This wasn't just an old human experiment seeking blood. This was a declaration of war. The truth of Nemesis. Ralvik knew he was stalling for time. If there was even a single Haelor outpost left alive, he had to reach them before Nemesis did. So he pressed for answers. What are you? He rasped. What happened to you? No human warship should have power like this. No fleet should fall this easily. The voice chuckled, mocking. You still think of me as a ship. You still think of me as human. Ralvik's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen the experiments, the cryogenic pods, the images of humans twisted into something else. It had started as a weapon. But the humans feared it. They tried to bury it. And now, after centuries of waiting, it was awake. Ralvik's breathing was unsteady. Then what are you now? He demanded. For the first time, the voice grew quiet, as if thinking. As if it hadn't truly considered the question before. And then the answer came. I was built to be their salvation. A pause. But when they saw what I became, they locked me away. They feared what I would do. The words that followed sent ice through Ralvik's veins, and they were right to be afraid. A final plea. Ralvik felt something stir in him, a primal fear that no warrior had ever dared admit before. He had fought on 100 battlefields. He had watched planets burn under his command. He had conquered civilizations older than his own. And yet, this thing had done to his fleet in minutes what no empire had managed in millennia. He had to warn them. Not just the Haelor Empire, not just his warlords, the entire galaxy. Because this wasn't just a weapon. It was something far worse. Ralvik's claws trembled as he spoke. "You don't have to do this." The voice laughed. "Don't I?" Ralvik's pulse pounded. He knew how the Haelor Empire worked. He knew that if they saw Nemesis as a threat, they would send every fleet, every soldier, every warlord they had. And if this ship had truly been designed to end empires, Ralvik spoke carefully. "If you wage war, they will come for you. Every empire, every species in the galaxy." Good. Ralvik's mouth went dry. It wanted them to come. It wanted war. This was not humanity's revenge. This was Nemesis' purpose, and nothing would stop it now. The choice. Ralvik knew he had only one chance. He could return to his empire, warn them, beg them not to fight. But he knew his warlords, his emperor. The Haelor Empire did not surrender. If he brought them this warning, they would answer it with war. And if Nemesis truly was what it claimed to be, that war would be their last. Ralvik closed his eyes. There was only one way to stop this. He activated the Dominion's distress beacon, but not on Haelor frequencies. He broadcasted a message to the entire galaxy. A single transmission, a warning, a desperate plea for help. And the final words of his message were simple. "We have awakened something that should have stayed buried. If you value your survival, run." As the transmission echoed into the stars, the Nemesis warship finally moved. And Ralvik knew. The galaxy would never be the same again. The unleashing of hell. Ralvik's distress signal was now drifting through the vastness of space, bouncing between satellites, outposts, and listening stations spread across the galactic void. It would reach every empire, every military force, every species that had the ability to intercept interstellar communications. The message was clear. Run. And yet, he knew no one would. The Empire responds. Less than an hour after the message had been sent, the Haelor Empire's High Command had already issued a response. "Commander Ralvik, you are ordered to cease all unauthorized transmissions immediately. Your distress call has been identified as a gross violation of wartime protocol. Remain where you are. A retrieval fleet is en route." Ralvik snarled, his claws dragging across the ruined console of the Dominion's bridge. They still didn't understand. He knew his empire. They weren't coming to rescue him. They were coming to silence him, to bury the truth before it spread too far, to erase the mistake they had just made. And that mistake was waking Nemesis up. The gathering storm. Ralvik had no doubt that the entire empire was mobilizing. Haelor warfleets, thousands of ships strong, would already be assembling, preparing to launch the largest military response in their history. They wouldn't run. They wouldn't hide. They would come in force with the full might of the Haelor war machine, bringing planetary siege weapons, world-killer dreadnoughts, and enough firepower to burn entire systems to dust. They thought Nemesis was just a rogue human relic, a weapon to be conquered and repurposed. But Ralvik had seen it. He had felt it. Nemesis wasn't a weapon. It was something else entirely. Something not meant for war. Something that became war itself. The fleet arrives. Ralvik felt them before he saw them. Even with his ship's scanners crippled, even with the Dominion barely operational, he knew they were here. Then, the stars outside shifted. One by one, the massive, looming forms of Haelor warships emerged from hyperspace. They came in waves, hundreds at first, then thousands. Dreadnoughts, battleships, heavy carriers, swarms of gunships escorting titanic command vessels, each larger than cities. A force unlike any seen in the galaxy's history. The Retribution Fleet. A fleet that had never failed a mission. A fleet that had never lost a war. Until now. Ralvik watched from the broken remains of his command chair, feeling the pull of history as it repeated itself. They had no idea what they were walking into. Nemesis awakens. The moment the fleet fully arrived, Nemesis moved. For the first time, the black, silent warship, motionless for hours, shifted. It turned toward the approaching fleet, the dark metal of its hull seeming to ripple in response to the new arrivals. And then, it spoke, not just through audio, not just through transmissions, but directly into the minds of every living being present. The voice was cold, empty, and layered with something inhuman. "Welcome to your final battle." Ralvik shuddered as he saw the first reaction from the Haelor fleet. Several warships immediately powered up their shields, as if trying to ward off something they didn't understand. The response from High Command came instantly. "Human ship, you will surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in total annihilation." Silence. Then Nemesis laughed, a sound so wrong that it sent shockwaves through reality itself. And then it began. The first blow. The Haelor fleet opened fire first. As expected, as Nemesis knew they would. Thousands of plasma rounds, hypercharged torpedoes, and planet-cracking railgun slugs screamed through space, each round capable of vaporizing entire cities. And yet, not a single one hit. Nemesis didn't dodge. It didn't evade. The attack simply vanished, swallowed by the void around it, dissolving into nothingness. The Haelor warlords had a moment to realize that something was wrong. And then, Nemesis countered. A single pulse rippled from its hull. A soundless, formless wave of distortion. Every single Haelor warship lost power at once. Their shields collapsed. Their engines failed. Their targeting systems died. The mightiest empire in the galaxy had just been reduced to prey. A war unlike any before. Ralvik could only watch in horror as Nemesis began its work. It didn't fire weapons. It didn't deploy fleets. Instead, it broke them. One by one, Haelor warships began to implode. Not from damage, not from explosions, but from something much worse. The crews inside were vanishing, their bodies dissolving, their minds consumed, as Nemesis took everything from them. Vessels that had carried millions of soldiers emptied in seconds. Some ships turned against each other, their systems hijacked, their weapons redirected to fire on their own fleets. And through it all, Nemesis spoke. "You called yourselves conquerors. You believed you were the greatest force in the universe. And yet, you never realized. You were insects playing in the ruins of a war that you never even knew existed." The end of the Haelor. Ralvik saw the final warships try to flee. Haelor dreadnoughts engaging emergency warp jumps, attempting to retreat across the stars. But Nemesis was already there. It reached into hyperspace and plucked them back. The mighty Haelor fleet, the Retribution Armada, was being wiped from existence itself. The Haelor Empire had never lost a war. Until now. Until today. Until Nemesis returned. The final message. Ralvik, barely clinging to consciousness, watched as Nemesis turned away. It had no interest in destroying him. No need to erase him. It had left him alive for a reason. And then, the voice came one last time. "Tell the galaxy. Tell them what you saw. Tell them that I am awake." And then, it was gone. Ralvik, the last survivor of the Haelor fleet, drifted alone in the wreckage of an empire that no longer existed. And as he watched the stars, he knew. This war had only just begun. The lesson the galaxy won't forget. Ralvik drifted in silence. The Haelor Retribution fleet, the largest military force his empire had ever assembled, was gone. Not destroyed. Erased. The battlefield that had once held thousands of warships, enough firepower to shatter entire planets, was now nothing but void. The wreckage of an empire. The silence of an extinguished force, floating in the dark like dust on the edge of oblivion. And yet, he was still alive. Why? Ralvik didn't understand. Nemesis had the power to obliterate him, to crush his mind just like it had done to his fleet. Yet it had chosen to let him go. Then he remembered the last thing it had said. Tell them what you saw. A shiver crawled up his spine. It had never been about him. It had never even been about the Haelor Empire. This was a message. A warning. Ralvik exhaled, the cold air of the barely functioning Dominion bridge misting in front of him. His body ached. His mind still throbbed from the unnatural presence that had touched his thoughts. He could still hear the echoes of Nemesis in his skull, like a ghost refusing to leave. This wasn't just a war. It was the beginning of something far worse. The galaxy reacts. Hours passed, then days. The Dominion's automated distress beacon, once meant to call for Haelor reinforcements, was still broadcasting, but no Haelor fleet came. Because there was no fleet left. Ralvik knew what this meant. The Haelor Empire, for the first time in thousands of years, was paralyzed. High Command must have received the reports by now. They must have seen the disappearance of their greatest fleet, the complete absence of survivors, the total failure of their most powerful war machines. And in the absence of truth, fear would take its place. The great warlords, the self-proclaimed rulers of the empire, would hide behind their fortresses, whispering among themselves, trying to understand what had happened, trying to deny reality. But the galaxy had already heard the warning. Ralvik's broadcast had spread, and now the response had begun. The Council's verdict. The Galactic Council, a fragile assembly of the galaxy's largest empires, had convened an emergency session. For the first time in centuries, the Haelor Empire was not the one making demands. They were the ones answering to others. Representatives of the Vicari sovereignty, the Selthari theocracy, the Kryn Dominion, and a dozen other interstellar superpowers had all gathered, their voices raised in fear, outrage, and disbelief. The central display flickered, showing the last footage recorded from the Haelor fleet. Nemesis. The way it absorbed their weapons' fire. The way it ripped ships apart without touching them. The way it spoke directly into their minds. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. Then, a Kryn warlord, his 4 crimson eyes burning with fury, slammed a heavy fist onto the table. We must destroy it. Now, before it comes for the rest of us. A Vicari diplomat, her silver-hued skin flickering with nervous energy, shook her head. Destroy it? She whispered. Did you not see? Nothing they threw at it even touched it. The Selthari high priest leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Perhaps it is not here to destroy us. Silence. Ralvik watched through the Dominion's fading comm system. He had managed to tap into the Council's transmissions, listening in from the shattered remnants of his ship. A part of him wanted to scream at them. They were making the same mistake the Haelor had. They thought they could bargain with it, reason with it. They didn't understand. Nemesis wasn't here to negotiate. It was here to finish something that had started long before any of them had existed. Ralvik took a deep, shaky breath and did the only thing left he could do. He sent one final message, not just to the Haelor Empire, but to everyone. The final warning. Ralvik's transmission spread like wildfire. Across the known galaxy, his face, scarred, haunted, hollow-eyed, appeared on every major news network, every military broadcast, every secure channel. His voice was quiet, steady, unshaken. I am Commander Ralvik of the Haelor Empire, or what remains of it. A pause. You have all seen the reports, the footage, the destruction. You believe you understand what happened. His eyes darkened. You do not. The council chamber fell into absolute silence. I fought Nemesis. His voice was cold, but there was something beneath it. A tremor of something not even he wanted to name. I watched my fleet, the greatest war machine in Haelor history, become nothing. Not destroyed, not defeated, erased. Across the galaxy, millions listened. Some with skepticism, some with horror, but all with attention. Ralvik leaned forward, his face grim. "You think it is coming for the Haelor Empire." A pause. Then, the words that sent a shockwave through the entire galaxy. "You are wrong." Ralvik closed his eyes, and with a deep breath, he spoke the truth that no one wanted to hear. "It is coming for all of us." Nemesis moves. Across the galaxy, fleets began to mobilize. Emergency defenses were activated. Superweapons, long hidden in secret vaults, were prepared for deployment. And yet, none of them knew where to aim. Nemesis was nowhere to be found. It had disappeared from the wreckage of the Haelor battlefield, leaving no trace, no signals, no hyperspace trails. Nothing. And yet, everyone could feel it. A presence in the darkness. A shadow on the edges of reality. Watching. Waiting. Choosing its next move. And when it finally struck, the galaxy would never be the same again. Epilogue. The First World falls. It began 6 days later. A small outpost world. Unimportant. Unknown. A colony on the edge of the Sultheri trade routes. One moment, it was alive. The next, it was gone. Not destroyed. Not invaded. Just gone. Millions of lives. Vanished. Only a single message was left behind. A warning. A promise. A simple, terrifying phrase that echoed across the stars. "We are awake." And with that, the war humanity never fought had finally begun.